All right, I want to welcome everybody to tonight's Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche for Thursday, April 28th. And the theme of our show is Whom the Gods Would Destroy. And we're going to be hearing from Gerald Rose tonight, and he's got a lot to say about this topic, and we want to stay right on that topic. So in order to do that, we're going to start with a sonnet by the poet Percy Shelley. Shelley wrote this sonnet entitled England in 1819. And I would like you to have in mind the present ancien regime in Washington, D.C., as well as in London, where, of course, Shelley had that in mind when he wrote this poem. England in 1819. An old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king. Princes, the dregs of their dull race, who flow through public scorn, mud from a muddy spring. Rulers who neither see, nor feel, nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling till they drop, blind in blood, without a blow. A people starved and stabbed in the untilled field. An army whom liberticide and prey makes as a two-edged sword to all who yield. Golden and sanguine laws which tempt and slay. Religion, Christless, godless, a book sealed. A Senate, time's worst statute, unrepealed. Are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illumine our tempestuous day. So that was Shelley's characterization of a dying regime in 1819, which was the British Empire. In that light, though many make the mistake of continuing to state that the United States is the primary actor in all of this, was an American by the name of Michael Tracy, who's still in London now, who filed a report about 2 weeks ago, which has also gotten some circulation in social media through places like Jimmy Dore's site and some other places. And here, his name is Michael Tracy, and he wrote a report commenting upon a peculiar gathering that he went to, which was supposed to be a sort of off-the-record discussion of policy, except he was never told that, and he had full access to it, and it seemed to be completely on the record to him. And he talked about this. Here's what he had to say. There's a chap called Tobias Ellwood who spent the past week doggedly promoting his latest idea to save Western civilization. From a military perspective, Ellwood explained, it's never been more urgent than to impose a humanitarian sea corridor off the coast of Ukraine. This would involve an outright naval intervention by NATO in the Black Sea, with the objective being to prevent Russia from seizing control of the strategically important city of Odessa. He says that the West will finally come to appreciate the existential stakes of the conflict now before us and accept that we are actually in a 1938 period, but actually worse. Now, the American Michael Tracy satirizes this by saying, well, why did he use actually twice? Actually in 1938 period, but actually worse. And he said, well, we presume that he used that for maximum emphasis, but he is actually a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom and the chairman of the impressively titled Defense Select Committee. Now, I'm going to stop there and just make a couple of observations. England and the United States are saying a lot of things about a lot of things. Vladimir Putin responded to this yet today, and I don't have the exact wording in front of me. I will have it later for after Jerry finishes, and I'll give you the exact wording. But basically what Putin said is no one should make the mistake of not understanding that if anything is done to challenge what we have established as the military action that we deemed necessary for the existential survival of Russia, if anybody challenges that, we will respond swiftly, and we will respond with capabilities which we have, and we will use them. Now, we know that will have been registered. Whatever the bluster, whatever the bluff, whatever the other thing said will be. It should be, however, kept in mind that you're dealing with an old, mad, blind, despised, and dying order. So in that circumstance, that doesn't mean that they're going to listen. We had a chance today to do an interview with Bruce Fein. Some of you know him. He's an American constitutional lawyer. He's well known because he goes back to the time of Watergate. He's worked for the American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, a lot of conservative things, but he's notable because he was also briefly employed by Edward Snowden's father. He has called for the impeachment of George W. Bush, as well as Barack Obama, as well as other presidents. And he's been very clear in various ways about violations of the law. Now, here's what he's got to say about the present circumstance. He states that the United States and its NATO allies are now legally vulnerable to attack by an enemy belligerent, meaning Russia, because of NATO's and the United States' systematic or substantial violations of a neutral country's duties of impartiality and non-participation in the conflict. Let me translate that. He's saying that because of all those weapons that you're selling, and because now you're saying you're going to put $33 billion more in there, you are a co-belligerent. He says neutrality, this is all quoting, neutrality is violated by permitting a belligerent to violate its territorial integrity. For example, he says that's what he thinks Russia has done. He thinks Russia is in violation. He doesn't agree with the Russian invasion. He says, or by supplying warships, arms, ammunition, military provisions, or other war materials directly or indirectly, or supplying military advisors to a belligerent, as the United States has done. He says, under the Declare War Clause of the U.S. Constitution, co-belligerency, which displaces the status of the United States as a neutral, requires a declaration of war by Congress. So that's all a quote from him. And then he describes the fact that Congress will not fulfill its congressional duties, and it's been pushing the executive branch, the administration, to deepen its involvement in what he says is clearly now a U.S.-Russian proxy war. So now this is a very important thing for all of the citizens that are listening to me and everybody else in the country to understand. This country is in violation of its Declare War Clause of the Constitution. This country, your nation, is in violation of your Constitution. Now, this is not unusual in American history since particularly 9/11. Syria was in violation. Afghanistan was in violation. Libya was in violation. But what's important is to recognize that from a legal standpoint, what he points out, Bruce Fein points out, is that Russia would be within its legal rights to attack the United States. Nothing illegal about that. So there's nothing, not a question of whether you like it, you dislike it, you agree with their policies, or you don't. He said, and this is the issue of the conception. If there's any conception of a law, law is impartial. He said, this is the key idea that we have to return people to. Forget your partisan whatever it is, whatever you like or don't like, or who you like or don't like. That has nothing to do with the concept of law. And so where we stand tonight, is in a circumstance in which we, the people, are required under our Constitution, seeing this violation, to correct this madness. Nobody else has that obligation. Sure, of course, you could say abstractly, Biden and the people that are doing the violations have the abstraction, but come on. Who believes that criminals now have the primary responsibility for reversing their crimes? That's nice to say in the abstract. It's certainly true in one sense. Who's going to bring them to justice? So this is what the American people, we, this organization and its associates, and people of goodwill are now charged with doing, and it's because of that we picked tonight's topic. And now we'll go to Jerry, who will give us an idea of how to address this idea of correcting tragedy from a higher standpoint. Jerry?
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. I thought that was very effective. And the poem is right to the point. We are now in a classic breakdown crisis. Now, most people think, well, it's economics or it's one thing or another. What you have is a ruling elite. Elite, I use that very loosely, who is incapable and has demonstrated complete incapability to respond to the breakdown. They in fact, through this rules-based order, they insist that their will and the imposition of their will by tyrannical power will correct the problems. And this is precisely what Sophocles, in his famous Antigone, develops. Because Lyndon LaRouche used to say this all the time: whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. Now, this is a precise formulation which was the last line in the Sophocles play Antigone. And I'm going to go through the details of it, mainly because, to me, history is a way of actually experiencing through your own imagination and through your capability to think something through that forces you to understand in a more deep and nuanced way what you're dealing with. Because for the Greeks, which was the basis of Western civilization, and I'm not going to go through it tonight. I could, but I'm not going to. The basis for our way of thinking, at least in its best capacity, was elaborated by Homer in his epic poems, two epic poems, really, the Odyssey and the Iliad, and by what is extant now of Aeschylus and Sophocles, and in a different way, Euripides. And so when Lynn used to say, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad, he was referring to the Theban plays of Sophocles. And to me, I reread all of them, and what I'm going to give you is a fairly scientific understanding of what this means, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. Because this is the political factor that will bring them down. It's precisely what they think is their strength, which is this so-called utopian military power, is precisely their weakness. And the population of the world, and you see this with India, Russia, India, China clearly, and now Argentina, a number of other places, in responding to what would be putting in jeopardy 1 billion people because of the loss of the capacity for production of food. India said, with Russian inputs, we will pick up the slack on the Ukraine, what will not be produced in Ukraine. And Argentina said they would do such things, and Brazil in a different way said they would do such things. And India in particular said, and if the WTO tells us you can't subsidize the farmers, well, we're not going to listen to the WTO. We're not going to let 1 billion people starve for your rules-based order, for your so-called anti-American free trade. We're not going to do it. And the same with Argentina and the same with Brazil. And, of course, Russia is, Putin said a month ago, who will feed, if you do these sanctions, who will feed the world? And between them and India and them and other places, they're going to make the move. And we, as you know, Helga was on nationwide TV in China calling for massive production output of food. Again, I'm not going to go through that because that's not the subject for tonight. So what are we talking about in these Theban plays? Well, the Antigone, which is the last, there were 3 plays. One was Oedipus Rex, the other was Oedipus at Colonus, and finally the Antigone. And it's the 3 plays that give you a nuanced view of what this madness is. And a very, as Dennis said, and I'm really happy he said this, in fact, Sophocles, being a genius, portrays something that would surprise you, which I'll go through, as a way of thinking about how to deal with these kinds of things. Now, first, you all know or have heard of the story of Oedipus Rex, in which it was prophesied at his birth that he would kill his father and marry his mother and have children by his mother. At his birth, this was prophesied. His father, hearing this prophecy from a Tiresias, who was a seer at that point, it says, look, we got to kill the kid. We can't let this happen. Great guy, So his mother couldn't do it, and this is the theme of several other kinds of plays. Shakespeare picks up this theme. And gives him to the woodsman to so-called kill the kid. And that's a complicated story. And the woodsman takes him to another, a very far away city-state. And as fate would have it, Oedipus is raised by a good father and mother in a faraway kingdom. But, as things would have it, he hears of the prophecy. And thinking that the father, they never told him what the story was, that his father and mother were good, he said, I must avoid this and get away. Now, in the course of getting away, an arrogant charioteer tries to run him down, and he kills the charioteer. That happened to have been his former father, his birth father. And in solving the riddle of the Sphinx, he is lauded because the Sphinx was, destroying the kingdom of Thebes. He is lauded, and I forget her name, I think it's Jocasta, agrees to marry him because her husband's dead, and she marries him. And of course, therefore the prophecy is fulfilled. So how does Oedipus Rex start? Well, there is a terrible plague, if you will, that is haunting the Theban territory. And they can't get rid of it. So Oedipus comes out on the stage and says, look, I have to find out what is causing this. I am the king here. I have responsibility for all the people, and therefore I must find out what's going on. And in fact, he sends Creon, who comes back later in Antigone, to find out what's going on, and he sends him to the Oracle of Delphi. When Creon comes back, he says to Oedipus, there is something very unclean in the kingdom, and therefore if we must root out that which is unclean. But it is here, it is in the kingdom, and it's fixable. So Oedipus becomes elated. He said, great, we're going to solve it, because he really is a good king and really cares about the people, right? So he pursues it. I'm just getting to a point. He pursues this. And in the course of pursuing it, Tiresias, who actually knows the story, because he's a seer and he's blind, says to Oedipus, don't pursue this. Whatever you do, don't pursue this. And Oedipus says to him, look, the people of this kingdom are suffering, they're being destroyed by this uncleanness, and I must pursue this no matter where it leads and no matter who it gets. I have to pursue it. And he does. And he finds out what happened. And he blinds himself. He says, I cannot, on this earth, I want to see nothing more. And he blinds himself. And his two sons, his wife kills herself, hangs herself, and he blinds himself. But the irony of him trying to avoid his fate, fighting for the people of his kingdom, and his destruction because of those good impulses indicate the problem of fate, or what the Greeks call moira. There is a problem with that, though it's very interesting how Sophocles actually deals with this question. So in the Oedipus of Colonus, which is to me one of the most extraordinary plays ever written, and it's very rarely performed, and this gets to Antigone in an interesting way, because Antigone is the only one of his children, and is, in a sense, it's his sister, daughter, whatever, because of the incest thing. She refuses to leave him. And she wanders with him as his eyes, and she is totally loyal to him. His two sons, who are ambitious, who actually inherit the kingdom, would inherit the kingdom, he has to choose which of his sons should inherit the kingdom. Well, he seeks sanctuary in the grove at Colonus. I believe it's the grove to Athena. And in this sanctuary, Creon pursues him with an army and threatens him, you must come back. We will take you from this grove, and you must choose which of your sons would be king. And Oedipus curses both of them. He says, they abandoned me. Tragedy can hit anyone, can destroy anyone. They abandoned me, and therefore I curse both of them. Well, Creon, with his army, is about to seize Oedipus in seeking sanctuary in the grove at Colonus. And Theseus, the founder of Athens, with his army, says to Creon, I don't know who this man is, I don't know what he's done, but his being at Colonus and seeking sanctuary is sacred. And therefore, if you seize him from Colonus, the full might of Athens will come down on you. And actually Theseus doesn't know who he is, right? And doesn't know what he's done. And this is a very interesting thing, by the way, in the Odyssey. I'm not going to go through it tonight. So Creon has to back off. And Theseus has a private meeting, takes Oedipus says, I have much wisdom to give you. And he takes him into the grove. You don't know what they said. But by now, through his suffering and his loss of everything, absolutely everything, his sight, his health, through his unbelievable suffering, he comes to wisdom, which is referenced, of course, by the famous, discussion of, and pain that will not forget falls on the heart, drop by drop, until in our despair comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. This is what Robert Kennedy said when he heard of his brother's death. Those are the thoughts that he had. So the founding of Athens, which is actually developed in more profound detail by the Orestean trilogy, the founding of Athens was based on an idea of law and based on an idea of the right of every individual to the protection of God and the protection of the state as a defense against tyranny. So in the third play, which is the Antigone, the curse of Oedipus on his two sons, visit both sons. In a battle for the city, they both kill each other. So Creon became the king at that point because he was what was left. And Creon decrees that one of the brothers was good, who was defending the city, and the other brother who claimed the throne, who had the equal claim, was bad. And he bans the one brother from being buried, which was sacred. It was a very sacred ritual. So Antigone, who is an extremely powerful and interesting figure, defies Creon. Creon said anyone who buries the brother that he deemed evil and wrong will die. And the scene opens in which he makes this decree. And Antigone, her sister, says to her, look, you can't defy this decree. This is the law. This is Creon. He is the king. You can't defy law. And she says he has defied the law. It is not up to him to decide who is bad and who is good. He doesn't have that power. It is the gods that decide that. And this is sacred. And without missing a beat, she buries the brother that they refuse to bury. Creon says she must be destroyed because she defied the law. And her argument is extremely powerful. Is no, you defied the law. You do not make law. There's law above what you say. And if you defy that law, I'm not going to put up with it. And the Senate, typical Senate, was siding with him. Well, you have to make the law. There won't be law and order if you don't make the law, if you don't enforce the law. Well, it turns out his son was going to marry Antigone. And his son makes a plea to Creon and says, sir, consider you might be wrong. Consider mercy as the way you really should, because the people in the street think Antigone is right. And you destroy yourself if you do this. And he has this powerful speech, Creon, which, Tony Blinken would blush, the speech he makes. I am the state. I am the law. There will be chaos if my law is defied, and therefore I must carry this out. So he doesn't have and the Senate is a little freaked out by now because, in fact, the population is pretty angry about the whole thing. And Antigone has become a powerful image for people. So the Senate, though, says, well, maybe we should have a little leniency. He says, no. He's insistent. So they, rather than kill her, they wall her up in a mountain with hardly any food. Then Tiresias comes to Creon, and he said, you have made a terrible mistake. You have defied law. You have defied sacredness. And by now, since Tiresias, is such has never been wrong, Creon freaks out. So he rushes to get Antigone out of the cave. But by then, Antigone had hung herself, and his son had run on his sword because when he saw her kill herself, he killed himself. And his wife, Creon's wife, because of the death of her son, kills herself. So Creon, the last scene is Creon sitting on the throne, completely broken, and the Senate says, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. It's the totality, the sweep of this has extraordinary implications. And when how contemporary, and how Oedipus and Athens in its better phase. It went through a massive degeneration after the Persian Wars, and that's another story. And at some point, I would like to do the Orestean trilogy to get it in a different way. But Athens, Pallas Athene, which is the goddess of wisdom, and as Schiller said, wisdom sprang fully armed from the head of Zeus, ready to fight. And I think that's where we are. They cannot win. This is a breakdown crisis, but it's a subjective breakdown. We had this experience just yesterday in which the highest court in New York State said the redistricting was so unfair and so it's just so unfair, they threw the redistricting out. So not only did this dying regime triple the requirements, they didn't even think to put together a plan by which people could vote. And we're going to blow this thing sky high. And this is a moment in which we represent that moral force as a moral force. And, remember, Antonov in the April 9th meeting, this is the ambassador of Russia to the United States, said, keep me in the loop, keep me informed. And India has come out stronger. So we are fighting for the United States. We're fighting for the soul of the United States. And we have capability to do that. So I think that gives you a sense of whom the gods would destroy, because that's what we're dealing with at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. Let me just open up the queue here so people can begin to get. Okay, so now it's open for everybody to get in. Press *6 to get in the queue. And what we'll do here is just, as you're doing that, give a couple of examples. This is something that appeared in the Wall Street Journal today by the former Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy, Seth Crosby. And the name of his article, or his op-ed, was "The U.S. should show it can win a nuclear war."
Oh, my God. I didn't even know that. Oh, man.
Yeah, can win a nuclear war. Okay?
Oh, shit.
Okay?
Woo.
So here it says...
Stanley Kubrick, where are you?
Yeah, right.
Stanley Kubrick, where are you? Oh, man.
Yeah, U.S. Navy...
Wow, now you got me scared.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
guys. No, that's fine. That's fine. It says U.S. Navy surface ships should be armed with tactical nuclear weapons, which could be deployed against Russian nuclear missile submarines. Quote, thus reducing Russian second strike ability, the U.S. undermines Russia's ability to fight a nuclear war. Jeopardizing Russian second strike capability would tangibly raise the military stakes. Now, of course, if you're saying you're jeopardizing their second strike capability, means that you're intending a first strike, because obviously you don't what the first strike. But he doesn't say that. That's me. He says, Mr. Putin could no longer unleash his nuclear arsenal with impunity. Instead, he would need to reckon with the possibility that NATO could decapitate the Kremlin. Yes, suffering casualties in the process, but still decapitated.
Whoa, man. Well, decapitated is right. Jesus,
yeah,
God, this guy.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Self-decapitated. Whoa.
That's what the story is of that. So that's one thing, and then the second, which is just a quick reference to the Foreign Secretary of England, Liz Truss, who talked about this thing you referenced about, the right, or actually the rise of China. She's saying, who says the rise of China is inevitable? She says, by talking about the rise of China as inevitable, we are doing China's work for it. In fact, their rise is not inevitable. They will not continue to rise if they don't play by the rules. The G7 should act as an economic NATO, collectively defending our prosperity. If the economy of a partner is being targeted by an aggressive regime, we should act to support them, all for one and one for all. We want to see a network of partnerships stretching around the world, standing up for sovereignty and self-determination, and building shared prosperity. The UK will be an active and agile part of this network. Conclusion. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, geopolitics is back. That's her conclusion. Okay, so there you have it, Jerry.
Well, I'm glad you started with that poem. Oh man.
Yeah, that kind of that kind of is definitely
makes a point, right?
A problem.
Well, whom the gods would destroy. Whom the gods would destroy.
Right.
Very
now, all right, let me just say again, press *6 to get into queue. I don't see anybody in there. I'm not entirely unaware of why. And what I'll just say, we did have another call going on simultaneously. As Jerry knows, in the New York case, that call would have just ended actually a few moments ago. And all the petitioners and all the organizers are on that line. So
true.
Just to say that's just something just normally. Now there's one thing that got texted in to me, not entirely clear, and I won't go through who asked the question, but they wanted to have you answer this. He said, well, if Oedipus was attempting to avoid tragedy, why is it that he was treated this way? Sort of, what's the point of his having, despite his best intentions, he still ends up where he ends up.
Well, there you see, one of the problems of Greek culture, which really took Christian culture to overcome, but the Greeks were extremely open to Christian culture, was this idea of fate, or what was called Moira, in this Greek tragedies, that it was fated. So no matter what he did, it was going to end up that way. The gods had fated it, right? Which was one of the weaknesses, which certainly Plato understood. But look at how Sophocles deals with this question. Through his enormous suffering. First of all, he found out that Antigone would never abandon him through his suffering. He also found out that Theseus, the founder of Athens, and law, in fact law, he could impart his wisdom to. So in a sense, at Oedipus at Colonus, he's dealing with this question of fate. It's Schiller's idea of the sublime, in which bad things happen. This is of course what happens to Maria Stuart at the end, right? She does get killed. But she becomes or Joan of Arc, in effect, does get killed. In fact, in the real world. But this is not tragedy. Mm-hmm. We recently, Marcia Malouk died. This was not a tragedy. In Bach's deals with this question in the St. Matthew's Passion, when Christ dies, es ist vollbracht. It is done. They've won the race. Their lives had enormous meaning, as did Antigone, as in some sense Oedipus. The tragedy is someone who lives their whole life and does nothing. Martin Luther King had much to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, is it really a tragedy? Only if you take it out of context. And in the Orestean trilogy, it's even more powerful. So the great Greek tragedians, like Aeschylus, like Sophocles, Euripides is a little bit different, polemical as hell against war. If you want anti-war polemics, this was at the height of the Peloponnesian Wars. And they almost killed him for his plays because he was attacking the idiots who got us into the war. And it ultimately led to complete disaster for Athens. Mm-hmm. So, but the point is, I think that's the way to see it. The sublime. And which is if properly played, in the Oedipus at Colonus. Theseus is sublime. Oedipus is sublime. Antigone is sublime. And her defiance of the rule of law brings Creon to his knees. So I think it's complex.
Okay, very good. Okay, there's some people in the queue, so I'm going to go to that. Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, in fact, you. Hi, this is Margaret.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Fantastic. No, I don't want to bring the discussion down to a lower level because this is really terrific. But I'm really struck by. I keep thinking back to what Lynn said in, I think, January of 2001 when W's government was just being assembled, and Lynn said, because he knew that there was the Y2K bubble was popping, and so he said, and all kinds of things were happening, and he said, this government that's coming into being is incapable of governing except through crisis management. So expect a crisis. And, when I'm looking at everything falling apart, like the stuff with New York State and just, the fact that we've got now hyperinflation is starting to dig in and various other things, I'm really struck by the analogy, and I just wondered if you have a comment on that.
Analogy to the Bush thing, or
the whole thing. Well, there's a lot of analogies, I guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's not. I mean, that's the point. But no, I mean, the broader point is whom the gods would destroy. In other words, they don't start gibbering. I mean, Biden gibbers sometimes, but that's not insanity. It's the absolute belief, absolutely hard belief that your word is law, and that's what holds society together. That's a peculiar form of insanity. And that's why you have a classic breakdown crisis. And therefore, our moral force and the moral forces that we are bringing together very much will shine in these kinds of circumstances. See, the problem with the whole Marxian thing, and it wasn't agape. It was philosophical radicalism. The bosses are killing you, you should kill back. I mean, crap. We're mobilizing on the deepest level, in the highest philosophical level, what it means to be human, this new paradigm. And under these circumstances, there's no telling what we can do. We've already seen it internationally. We have to win it in the United States. And if I might add, we do have a campaign involved in that.
Yes, I think the one thing I would just add here, Jerry, and there's several people in the queue, we're going to get to all of you, is that what Bruce Fein was pointing out concerning that the violation is of the Constitution of the United States. and that there have been multiple such violations. And what is the problem involved is that the citizens of the nation have the responsibility, as the legislative branch of government represents them, to call the executive to account. And so this image of Antigone to Creon is a very useful one, with the stipulation being that need not mean that you will personally survive in doing that.
Yeah, that's for sure true.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
Well, certainly Martin Luther King, in his famous speech on the mountaintop, was referencing that.
Yeah, exactly. And he says it from the beginning of the speech, not just the end. Yeah. So a lot of people, should read the speech. As you know, if I were standing at the beginning of space and time,
where would I be? Yeah,
okay.
Right.
Yeah, with the possibility of looking at a panoramic view of history, and the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, at what age would you like to live? And he goes through the whole thing, and then he said, I would say, if you would just allow me to live a few years in the middle of the 20th century, then I'll be happy. And he says, that's a strange statement to make. And he explains why, because this world's filled with chaos. He says, but only when it's as dark as it is that you can see the stars. And I see a new movement in humanity. Something different is happening in our world. Yeah. And then he begins from there, right? And so the whole thing is thoroughly composed. It was extemporaneous, which is one of the most
as was the Gettysburg Address.
About it.
Yeah, as was the Gettysburg Address.
Exactly.
It was sublime. It was the soul itself. Yeah.
So this is why people should look at it, and it bears a great, by the way, comparison to the second inaugural of Lincoln. But anyway, that's what he did, and I think that's what we're in. We're in that moment. And that's what our campaign in New York, in particular, has come to represent. I'm going to go back to the because there's a lot of people now in the queue. But thank you for that question. Okay, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you. This is Chris from Panama. Can you hear me?
All the way from Panama.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your presentation, gentlemen. I have a very basic question, and I just adored this quote, the quote, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. My question is this. Most of my friends or acquaintances, they won't read anything much. I have conversations about them based on what I've gotten from the LaRouche organization, Schiller, the EIR, over the years. What do you tell people? What do you tell friends, family? I've even called family meetings on the telephone to try to help them, or at least talk them through some sense of what's going on. We're watching the American president now disintegrate. He's breaking down. He's failing. Yet, and then we're reading now about high-ranking military officers and politicians talk about the possibility of first strike using tactical nuclear weapons, all this insanity. Here's the question, very basic question. What do you tell family and friends who won't read anything, who don't want to look this crisis straight in the face, straight in the eye? What do you tell them? They definitely won't read Antigone. They won't read Oedipus Rex. What do you tell them? What do you talk about?
Well, there's a double problem. The first problem is it's your family. It's a funny thing. There's a famous quote, but it's just true that in Galilee, nobody listened to Christ. Nobody joined Christ in Galilee because that's Joe the carpenter's kid, right? So we don't have to listen to him. So there's this famous saying, you're really a philosopher 100 miles from home. In other words, sometimes it's very hard to organize your family because they have profiles. It's not right, but that's the reality. Second thing, which is unavoidable, in which you're seeing social movements now grow up in India. You're seeing social movements grow up in America, which was the Trump insurgency with all its problems, but it's a social movement. You're seeing the yellow vests in in France. It needs leadership. So sometimes the one-on-one doesn't exactly work, but the fact that the hyperinflation and the deep, deep depression for most of the world's people is hitting now. These kinds of upsurges, if you can be addressed at the deepest level, and what you have to, we used to discuss this from the standpoint of a leadership. You have to qualify yourself. You have to know what to do. Qualify yourself. Concentrate on qualifying yourself. Concentrate on working through LaRouche's initiatives. Be part of this movement. Represent this movement. And increasingly within your country, there will be people who will rally to such ideas. You don't have to worry. Unfortunately, this crisis is coming on now, and I hope if we can make sure that you get the alert service and you can share it with other people, like thinkers, go to the university, go to where the intellects are. There are a lot of intellects in Ibero-America, a lot. And they'll be part of a much larger movement. The Schiller Institute is the critical element of leadership in that process.
I think it's a really great question, and there's some other people, or at least one person I know is called in, going to be able to, that will probably take that question up. I haven't answered the question because, you know, I've had those conversations.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
I think, you know, you had those conversations.
Let me just tell you, my brother wouldn't listen to a word I say. And he tells his kids not to listen. So it's not. Sometimes it's not so easy. I hope he's not listening tonight.
By the way, since we're in that age we're in, let me reference Jerry's "A prophet is not welcome in his own home."
Yes. Oh God, I know.
Okay. Richard Pryor once wanted to get that across to the audience. I saw him, Richard Pryor, in New York City in 1971. He was opening. Miles Davis was playing like a small club, 400 people, near the old Beacon Theater, and Richard Pryor was the opening act. So back in those days, it was a comedy club thing. So like, you know, he would be there, and you were sitting right there. This wasn't a big theater. And what Pryor was doing was he was developing this act where he would have real characters. And so he had this thing which was called the dialogue between the Wino and the Junkies. Okay? And so what happens is, and there's also, you know, a mythical person that kind of coming by, right, that Wino's talking to. So he wanted to get this point across, this specific point. So he said, he did it like this. He said, man, I know all kind of people in this place. You know, I know Jesus. Mama live right over there in the project. Nigga ain't shit. Okay? Because he knew by doing that joke in that way, he would get across to people the self-destructive quality of this wino.
Yeah, right. Sure.
And the fact that he would desecrate anything. Not that Pryor was religious, but he was trying to make a point about the character, the self-destructive character of these people, who he also wasn't ridiculing, but he's trying to get you to see them from the inside. Why is that an answer to this? Well, I'm going to leave that because there's a lot of other people in the queue, but I will say a little bit later why that's an answer to your question. Because when people are basically taking you through changes and they're not listening, what you have to do is you have to get them to see the tragedy of their opaqueness from another standpoint.
Yeah.
See, they don't realize they're self-destructive. They don't get it. Okay? They are their problem. But if you lecture them about that, even if you're a preacher, you're going to get nowhere. You got to come at it another way, and you have the positive alternative. Of course, we're going to say that. Here's what I'm doing, which is, of course, the other answer, right? Just you never worry about what they think. You say, hey, well, I just did this, or my organization's doing this, or did you hear about this? And what will happen is you'll set up a question in their mind. Why the hell is he telling me? That's what will happen.
Yeah, that's true too.
It will become a nagging question. Why is he saying this to me? And then they'll realize, oh, he thinks I can understand this. And that's how it comes across to people. And they will never thank you for that, usually. They never recognize you for that. But they will know exactly what you've actually done. And that's what you have to be satisfied with from family. I mean, family never, virtually never acknowledges, unless you have the great fortune that some people have had of having family members actually join and do things. But let us move on. And again, there's more to say about it, but I want to make sure I give some other people some chance to get in this. But thanks for that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi,
okay,
can you hear me?
Hear yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Jerry, thank you so much. This was really poetic, and I hope we can transcribe this, and not to be a nitpicker, with just a couple of slight editings of two things that just need to be refined.
Okay, sure. You know me. You know me.
Yes.
I have no problem with being edited.
But I think when Bobby Kennedy said that, it was about Martin Luther King dying. It wasn't about his brother dying. Right. It was about Martin Luther King.
All right.
It was an emotion-packed moment where there was about to be a huge riot, and he had the courage to go in front of people and say that, and it really. Yes. And of course, the idiots would say, "What did that crowd know about Aeschylus? Why did he do that?" Which is really that talk about the sublime. It was an incredible moment. Yeah. But anyway, I have never delved into this area of literature as the way that you have, and so it challenged my own more vague conception of this Greek literature. But I do want to share the more primitive idea that I had looking at this, because I think it's relevant to what you're saying. I think it builds upon what you're saying, which is because of this, the little I had read, plus also Schiller's play on the Bride of Messina, that the thing that just struck me is that the curse really is what we talk about when we talk about oligarchism, which people are always so totally confused about. Why are there these evil people? Why are these people being evil? And you have to go through this to understand it. And I think in that way it casts a certain paradoxical shadow on this question of tragedy and the sublime. It's not quite on the level of Schiller yet, because without the Christianity, you don't actually solve the paradox.
Right.
And that my reference point, just the other day I was cleaning the house and I picked up a volume of Rembrandt's paintings and was just flipping through it and saw some rather not very good replicas of the two Lucretia paintings.
Oh yes, sure.
Which are in the museum. And one of the most shocking experiences that a person can go through is to see these two paintings, the before and after. And there's been debate about this over centuries. whether she was right in committing suicide. Because she was such a noble person, why did she have to commit suicide? Right. And, there's no simple explanation except that before Christianity, there really was no other way. I mean, okay, that's why, Joan of Arc was killed in a pagan ritual. It was done by the church, but it was a pagan ritual. That once the conceptions of Christianity are introduced, the whole relationship between tragedy and the sublime shifts in human civilization, whether people agree with it or not. Yeah. But the underlying pathology that you're talking about, we are still laboring with the effects of it, and that's why I think what you just said, what you've done tonight, is very important, because I think people have to get an emotional grasp of this. That you have to kind of breathe the awesomeness of Antigone, which you went and where she ended, her role in this, to kind of lose your breath and to be sitting there and saying, how the heck is humanity going to get out of this? And it's by posing that in the most ruthlessly powerful way that the door begins to open to what is the solution principle, which lies in a completely different realm. That's what I just wanted to share with you.
Yeah, I think what you just said, I have nothing to add to that, and I would hope in any transcription that would be included.
Okay.
I'm going to reference that. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, thank you, Renee. Very important. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Jerry. So basically, I put up one of your old 1996 classes on Shakespeare on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And it's got it's gotten 824 views so far. So.
Really? Yeah, I was young once.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now recently I was helping Bill Ferguson with these video projects of putting what's his name? Will?
Fred Wills.
Yeah, Fred Wills, right. I was helping him on those video projects, and he talks about Shakespeare.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Right. So, but then watching your class, it brought up this issue of the Venetians and how they manipulated Henry VIII.
Yeah.
And in my research to help him on the project, it just brought out this weird paradox that you have this central issue of the Venetians, Henry VIII, the break, and all that, and the fact that this is never, ever, ever brought up in any historical document whatsoever.
Oh, yeah.
And just the vast number of just documentaries and so forth, it's all just soap opera crap.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Henry VIII. Yeah, well, he was out. I mean, talk about who the gods would destroy. Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, that's another example. His father, I've studied in depth this Henry VII, Richmond, at the end of the Henry VI, Richmond becomes Henry VII, right? And I've read several books on this question. And his father was a very complicated, complex character, really. He wasn't a great guy. He really wasn't. In fact, Louis XI was a genius. I mean, he was just a genius. I've done work on that. Henry VII was ruthless. See, they had gone through 100 years of killing each other, the York and Lancaster. So what he did, because he was personally ruthless, and he knew that if they kept doing this war, which of course Shakespeare captures, there wouldn't be anything left of England. So what he did was use the power of the state, and particularly the power to tax, to create an independent standing army, which is what Machiavelli talks about. Because whenever you went to war, you had to kiss some oligarch's ass York or Lancaster to mobilize to defend the king. So he centralized the power of the state, of a nation. It took really the genius of Lineker, Collett, the people who actually went to work with Ficino at the Academy of Athens, at the Florence, the Academy of Athens at Florence, the Platonic Academy at Florence. They actually went there. Grossin, Lineker, and oh man, I'm just a little tired. But the guy who founded Oxford University went there and studied the ancient Greek, learned to read Plato in the original. And they lay the basis for Sir Thomas More and, of course, Erasmus. And More and Erasmus create the revolution that Shakespeare unleashed, right? I mean, again, it wasn't preordained, but these were real geniuses. So there was an actual renaissance occurring in and around Henry VII. He himself is a very ambiguous character, but he centralized the power of the state. He crushed both York and Lancaster, crushed them, taxed them out of existence. For this, the British, there's a lot of, they really hate him. But that's okay. They hate everything good. So, but really, you have to understand, it's a very complex, Louis XI was a genius. So he created his own renaissance. Josquin de Prez, a number of other people, musical, he himself created it. Henry VII did what he did, but because of the Italian Renaissance and the people who trained directly at the Platonic Academy became the basis of a mass literacy movement, which Erasmus was part of, and of course Shakespeare was the highest development of that movement.
Yeah, he was sort of much more into like a Cosimo de' Medici kind of guy. That's what.
Yeah, he was a ruthless man.
Yeah, there are a lot of things. Things going on there.
And the reason Henry VIII hated him because he was so ruthless. Henry VIII was this exuberant kid. He did do some music and he was trained a bit, but he hated his father because his father didn't trust him at all. And well deserved on some level.
Yeah, and as to the Venetian question, don't forget Othello. People think about Othello wrongly, okay? But just understand, whenever Shakespeare is doing any of those things on the state, or all of his plays about the state, so he was addressing something that he knew that Elizabeth would have seen.
Yes, no question. Oh, well, she was there every night, practically. Oh,
well,
yeah,
but I'm also saying something she would have seen in Henry VIII.
Oh, yes. Oh, you kidding?
The woman would see it.
You bet she saw it. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you're looking at that, there's about all that other stuff. So you got to understand how she would see Othello.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting. I hadn't thought of that. That's good.
Well, yeah, but she would.
Yeah. She.
Well,
she
who's
did.
going to write the tragedy about the historical profession to, just ignore that or hide it or?
Well, you have something interesting. Let me ask you a question while everybody's on the phone. This is of relevance to everybody. What is the state of the audio and video projects? Do you have material from Fred that's actually very clear, that can be heard? Or
I think they basically figured out how to just do it by themselves without using me.
Yes, but is it all just transcription? I'm asking whether there's actual audio or video.
No, it's just audio.
Right. Okay.
And they would just ask me to basically put text on the video. That's it.
Text on the video, and you've got an audio track of Fred. But in other words, what he's saying is clear. Is that right?
No, because he has that very thick accent. So they just wanted me to put a subtext to go along with the audio.
I understand that. I'm asking whether or not people can read what he's saying that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it works out pretty good. It's like that video I did of Lynn's debate with Abba Lerner.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to that.
Okay, so similar to that. Okay, here's the reason. Because the natural weapon to use in this situation, especially given the way in which the Russians have recently appealed to nations in Africa, South America, and Asia to join in what they wish to do in the creation of a new economic and security and development architecture, the natural weapon is Fred Wills's discussions of Shakespeare and also Plato, where they are actually relevantly preserved and where they make relevant points. Why? Because Fred understood the British problem and the British crown better than let's say, as well as anyone alive. And if you use these things surgically right now, including getting them into these countries so that they are made to understand what the actual problem is, that would be a very powerful thing. And it shouldn't be a thing of, we got to compile all of them or anything like that. It's taking one or two of them where the text is clear. In other words, it can be read. They hear him doing it. They hear how he does it. Because they always had a sense of humor about these things. But they also had insight. And the importance here is its circulation into some of those nations as part of a strategic study. I mean, that would also freak out certain people who know that Fred he was giving lectures at the War College in Washington, D.C., so it would have another kind of impact also as well. So just something to know for people who are on and would never have even heard of him. He was the former foreign minister and justice minister of Guyana, and he was one of the earliest collaborators of this organization, and he spoke at the United Nations in 1976, putting forth our economic policy, the International Development Bank, and he was forced out of office during the subsequent, by 1978. He then went into exile here in the United States for the next 14 years of his life, where he lived essentially with our members in various ways, or independent of us, but, as a member. And he died in 1992 in June. So this is like the 30th anniversary, in fact, of his death is coming up. I think that will be, as I say, in June. I could check that, but I believe that's right. So this is a good time also to call attention to him and what his work was. But for that reason. Maybe, Jerry, you might even say something about some of that. We should actually at some point just figure that out.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Very good.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. I think we've got one more here. Okay. Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. This is Jose Vega here in the Bronx. I wanted to give a report on the petitioning process. I myself am committed to going out 7 days a week. And so far, the petitioning process, we're underway. We're kind of doing this like a military-style campaign pretty much. 45,000 required, but really we're going for 90,000 signatures, assuming that we have a 50% validity rate. And just for those who aren't aware of how petitioning works, just because you have a signature does not mean that signature is valid. The Board of Elections has to verify each signature, and your opponent has a right to challenge all of your ballots, meaning Chuck Schumer, Diane's opponent, can get a team of people to look at our signatures and find any reason to disqualify a signature. So we want to assume that 50% of our signatures are not valid to be counted. And therefore, we are going for at least 90,000 signatures. And I just want to give a report of, what I've kind of just seen out in the streets of New York. I mean, People who are petitioning out in New York City or New York State will tell you similar stories, I'm sure. But today I just saw stuff that really broke my heart. I mean, you're in historic places in New York City, and in these very historic places where lots of revolutionary things have happened, you have corners where you have teenagers who are selling drugs, and you have people who are just high on crack or something, just slumped over, and you barely mumbling and speaking. And I had one person come up to me and ask me, hey, can you take a picture, or can you show me how to share a picture that I just took? And so the guy had just taken a picture of one of the people slumped over, and he tells me, that's my son. And the guy looked like he was in his late 20s, and the guy who came up to me, was in his mid-50s. And he said, I took this picture to send it to my other son who's younger, who's in his teens, so that he could see what his brother has become. And so as I'm out there getting signatures for my petition, I'm looking at the reality of what has trickled down in the last 60 years of failed economic policy that is intentionally designed to kill people in destroyed neighborhoods as historic as ones in New York City. And so I'm reminded that this is greater than just petitioning. This is greater than just getting Diane on the ballot. This is about fixing and bringing justice to the wrongs that have been done by evil oligarchical people. And, that's why we petition, because it's for the people who've been done wrong and for generations of damage that has been caused. We have to start reversing that now. So that's my report.
Yeah, Jerry, I would ask you to say, since you're involved in various ways in this process, to just say, you have a response, obviously, what he said, maybe to fill that in for people a little bit.
Well, I think that the best way to understand it is the way I developed it at the end of the discussion on Antigone. We represent a moral force. When people come up to us, they recognize in us, and in Diane in particular, a quality that can only be described as agapic, in the sense that it doesn't matter who you are. It's like what Theseus said to Creon. I don't know who this guy is, but he's going to get justice from me. And that's the quality that we represent for all the people. And so much of the world is depending on us. And if anyone can help, come in, spend a weekend, spend a couple of days, we'll figure out how to get you there and pick you up and do what has to be done. This is the beacon of liberty and hope. And I think, what Jose said is very, very true.
Yeah, and I want to take the opportunity to answer the second part of Chris Kelly's question from my standpoint, second method of answering it. Because what happened to Jose was this: the guy did not come up to you to get you to figure out for him how to share a picture. Came up to you because he wanted to tell you that story. He wanted to have a way to tell you the story so that he didn't have to say to you, I want to talk to you about my son. He had made a choice. He made a decision. He's trying to do something. He figures he's lost this one.
Yeah, right.
He's got to do something about the other one. He wants you to know that that's what he's dealing with, because you are purporting to be out there representing a candidate that says they want to deal with the problems confronting society. Really? Well, here's the problem. Here's what I'm doing about it. I've lost him. I'm trying to stop the other one from going this direction. Think about what I said about the Richard Pryor joke. That's why I told it. I don't tell jokes because I'm, for them to be just funny or something. Look at it. Look at what it means. So when your members of your family say to you what they say to you, what you want to know, and it's up to you whether you want to tell them. It's up to is this is what they don't want to know. They want to be held accountable for this kind of condition in the world. They say, it's my right not to be held accountable to that. I have a right just to be with my family and be involved in the things I like and to get my own house and deal with my own problems. That's what they say. The entire society of which they are part is disintegrating inch by inch, then foot by foot, then yard by yard, then mile by mile. And they say, I have nothing to do about it. I have my rights.
Yeah, I would just share that. Yeah. No, you're right. I have my family, it says to me, what you're doing is useless.
Yeah. I'm all about family. Well, that guy is all about family too. Look at his family.
Yep.
So he brought that to you in the best form he could as a kind of parable. He says, I want you to help me teach me how to share this photo. What's he mean? Okay? So this is what the world we're in, people. And anybody that can come into New York or anybody that would like to help, get in touch with our campaign, get in touch with the people who volunteers. There's many things that we can do. We don't want to take more time now on that. So, Jerry, I'd like you to, if you have anything you haven't said or think needs to be added, go right ahead. And then
I always get inspired. It's just great. No, I think we did some good work tonight. Everybody did.
All right. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Yes, there will be the usual fireside, Manhattan Town meeting, 2 p.m. There'll be Harley Schlanger and our favorite Englishman, Mike Robinson, who, of course, will be getting on to tell us how much worse things actually are in England than we would possibly be able to comprehend. So that'll be at 2 o'clock on Saturday. Okay, so you can welcome
the Blind Mad King.
Yes, right, exactly. All right, very good, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week, if not on Saturday. Bye-bye.